Conviction. As we noted in the introduction, all of the 37 factors listed in the Wings to Awakening can be subsumed under the 5 faculties. Whereas Part 2 focused on the interrelationships among these various factors, this part of the book is devoted to using the 5 faculties as a framework for discussing the individual factors in and of themselves. Of the 5 faculties, the faculty of conviction covers the most ground, as it includes the total context for the practice of the Buddhist teachings. The many issues related to the attitudes and ethics needed to lead a Buddhist life, whether as a layperson or a monastic, fall under this category. Passage 69 defines the faculty of conviction as the 4 factors of stream entry, so to understand the nature of conviction, it is necessary to know what these 4 factors are. Passages 70 and 71 give different definitions for the 4. The first list gives prerequisites for stream entry: association with good people, listening to the true Dhamma, appropriate attention, and practice in accordance with the Dhamma. The second list gives qualities that characterize a person who has entered the stream: verified confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and virtues appealing to the noble ones. Both lists are relevant here, for conviction is a quality that leads to stream entry, whereas the attainment of stream entry is the point where conviction becomes unshakable. Only on the attainment of arahantship does knowledge become so total that conviction is no longer needed. The 2 lists of the factors of stream entry are similar in that they both cover all 3 aspects of conviction: social, whom to trust; intellectual, what to believe; and practical, how to act as a result. Because conviction is focused not on a descriptive proposition but on a course of action, the skillful mastery of the processes of karma in a social context, these aspects are inextricably intertwined. The social aspect comes from the need to associate with people who have already mastered these processes, learning from their words and emulating their actions. The intellectual aspect, belief in the principle of karma, is necessary because the development of skillfulness within the mind requires that one understand the nature of karma, take responsibility for one's actions, and have conviction in one's ability to benefit from developing one's skills. The practical aspect is necessary, for if one does not follow through in developing skill, it shows that one's conviction in the development of skillfulness is not genuine, and that one is not fully benefiting from one's beliefs. The relationship of these factors to the development of skillfulness is shown in several passages. For instance, 53 and 54 cite association with good people and appropriate attention, both of which are members of the first list above, as the primary external and internal prerequisites for the development of what is skillful. At the same time, the intellectual and practical aspects of conviction help to counteract the grosser levels of the roots of unskillfulness. Belief in the principle of karma helps to undercut delusion, while the practice of virtue helps to weaken the force of greed and aversion in the mind. To understand the detailed interaction of the social, intellectual, and practical aspects of conviction, we first have to examine them separately. Because having admirable people as friends is the whole of the holy life, we will begin with the social aspect first. The passages in this section focusing on the social aspect of conviction touch on 2 major issues: how to recognize good people and why one should associate with them. Passage 119 lists 3 basic teachings of good people. These can be taken as criteria for judging whether a person qualifies as good. If one meets people who criticize the practice of generosity, the practice of going forth into the renunciate life, or the practice of giving service to one's parents, one would do well to avoid associating with them, for their wisdom and motives cannot be trusted. If one must associate with them, one should not regard them as people to learn from or to emulate. Thus, the social and intellectual aspects of conviction interact in that one way of knowing whether to associate with a person is by listening to what that person teaches. At the same time, the teachings of good people enable one to know what is good. Passage 117 carries this point further, listing positive qualities to look for in a good person: conviction in the principle of karma, generosity, virtue, and discernment. People who teach these qualities and embody them in their lives qualify as good. The important point here, of course, is that good people are ultimately recognized by what they habitually do, rather than simply by what they say. These habits can be known only through long association over time. This is why, in the Buddhist monkhood, a student does not take a lifetime vow of obedience to a teacher. If he feels that the teacher does not have his best interests at heart, i.e., if he sees that the teacher does not really embody the above qualities, he is free to leave the teacher in search of another. A person who has attained stream entry finds it easier to recognize good people, for he or she is now a member of the noble Sangha and can recognize the qualities of that attainment in others as well. Good people, for a member of the Sangha, means the Buddha and the rest of the noble Sangha. Of course, the Buddha has long been totally unbound, but he left his Dhamma and Vinaya as a teacher in his stead, and so on that level one may still associate with him. The reason why a person embarking on the path to practice would need to associate with good people, rather than trying to be totally self-reliant, is that the roots of skillfulness within the mind lie mixed with the roots of unskillfulness, and the roots of unskillfulness make it difficult to tell which is which. Thus one needs the advice and example of others more experienced on the path to help identify one's own skillful qualities and to give encouragement in the task of developing them. Even if one is not yet committed to following the path, one would be wise to associate with good people who embody conviction, generosity, virtue, and discernment, for they are unlikely to treat one in an unfair or harmful manner. If they truly embody conviction and virtue, one can trust that their sense of shame and compunction will prevent them from acting on unskillful intentions. If they truly embody generosity and discernment, they have wisdom worth acquiring and will be willing to share it. This sharing of wisdom forms the basis for further benefits, setting in motion a causal chain leading all the way to the experience of awakening. This causal chain requires that one listen to the teachings of good people so as to understand the implications of the principle of karma. It also requires that one take such people as examples to emulate in one's own life. In this way, one can become a better person oneself and can enjoy the benefits coming with one's own improved mastery over the principle of karma. The wide availability of books on Buddhism tends to obscure the fact that the truths of the Buddhist teachings are not simply words or propositions, but are qualities of the heart and mind, the skillful mastery of thoughts, words, and deeds. These qualities are best learned not from books, but from people who are actually skilled. This is like learning a sport. One can pick up important principles from books written about the sport, but there is much more on a nonverbal level that can be learned only by associating with people who have actually mastered the sport. This might include a sense of how much practice is enough, a sense of one's own strengths and weaknesses, a sense of timing, a sense of one's teammates and opponents, and so forth. Adin 76-4 gives a similar list of the principles that characterize a good person, many of which cannot be verbalized in simple rules: knowledge of the Dharma, knowledge of the meaning of statements, a sense of one's own strengths and weaknesses, a sense of moderation in the use of the requisites of life, a sense of the proper time and season for doing things, a sense of different levels of societies, and a sense of how to judge people. Although the first two types of knowledge in this list are verbal and can be passed on in words, the others are more subliminal and can be picked up only by associating with good people and watching them in action. With the issue of verbal knowledge, we move from the social aspect of conviction to its intellectual aspect. The content of the verbal knowledge that can be picked up from good people begins with what 106 defines as mundane right view. There is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. There are fruits and results of good and bad actions. There is this world and the next world. There is mother and father. There are spontaneously reborn beings. There are contemplatives and Brahmins who, faring rightly and practicing rightly, proclaim this world and the next after having directly known and realized it for themselves. This passage means that there is merit in generosity, that the moral qualities of good and bad are inherent in the universe, and not simply social conventions, that there is life after death, that one has a true moral debt to one's parents, and that there are people who have lived the renunciate's life properly in such a way that they have gained true and direct knowledge of these matters. These beliefs form the minimum prerequisite for following the path to skillfulness. If one doubts them, one will find it difficult to muster the energy or commitment needed to develop skillful qualities in the mind. One would be more likely to revert to the selfish gratification of immediate desires, with little thought for right or wrong. The willingness to accept these beliefs on faith thus counts as the first step from the stage of mere acquaintance with the Buddhist teachings to the stage of commitment. These beliefs form the basis for the 3 points mentioned above as the teachings of good people: generosity, going forth, and service to one's parents. Appreciating the value of these principles and following them to the extent of one's abilities enables one to develop the proper character needed for comprehending the higher levels of the Buddhist teachings, culminating in the Four Noble Truths. As the first list of factors of stream entry points out, simply listening to the Dhamma is not enough. One has to develop appropriate attention as well, which, as we have already seen, involves knowing how to focus on the right questions. In this context, one begins by learning how to ask productive questions of one's teacher and then moves on to using the categories of the Four Noble Truths to ask questions of one's experience in general. In this sense, the act of listening and paying appropriate attention covers the first 2 levels in the development of discernment, understanding based on listening and on reasoning, and gets one started on the third, understanding based on the development of skillful qualities in the mind. Although listening to the Dhamma is a prerequisite for appropriate attention does not follow automatically from listening to the Dhamma. It has to be consciously cultivated, otherwise, the causal process will not lead to clear knowledge and release. This point is expressed in a famous stanza from the Dhammapada, 64-65. Even if for a lifetime a fool stays with the wise, he knows nothing of the Dhamma, as the ladle, the taste of the soup. Even if for a moment a perceptive person stays with the wise, he knows the Dhamma, as the tongue, the taste of the soup. The purpose of meditation, in which one consciously develops mindfulness and discernment so as to master and understand the skillful use of the mind, is to turn one into the perceptive person who can fully understand the Dhamma. With the attainment of stream entry at one's first taste of the deathless, the intellectual aspect of conviction is expressed in terms of verified conviction in the awakening of the Buddha, which branches out into verified conviction in the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. One's own taste of awakening verifies the reality of the Buddha's awakening and that of the Noble Sangha. One's understanding of how the awakening came about through the practice of the Dhamma verifies that the Noble Eightfold Path is the ideal synopsis of that practice, with nothing lacking or in excess. From this comes the standard expression of conviction in the triple gem: the Buddha is rightly self-awakened, the Dhamma well taught, and the Noble Sangha worthy of honor. What this means in practical terms is that one is now convinced beyond a doubt that the human ability to develop skillfulness can lead all the way to the deathless, and that the deathless is the highest excellence. Several passages emphasize that the experience of stream entry reinforces one's conviction that the true Dhamma is fully expressed only in the Buddhist teachings. This point will come as a surprise to many people who are aware of Buddhism's long history of tolerance toward other religions, and who assume that the enlightened attitude toward alternative teachings is to endorse the statement that many roads lead to the top of the mountain. This assumption, though, is based on a confusion between tolerance and endorsement. As we have already noted, from the streamwinner's point of view, the Noble Eightfold Path is the ideal expression of the way to awakening. To endorse any other path to the same goal would be to concede that the Noble Eightfold Path either lacks something essential or contains something superfluous. The Buddha is quoted as saying that any other supposed path to awakening would by definition be wrong view, wrong resolve, wrong speech, etc. To try to get results from such a path, he says, would be like trying to squeeze sesame oil out of gravel or to churn butter out of water. He did not deny that other teachings, advocating virtue and concentration, can lead to states of great peace or to rebirth in the higher heavens, but if one views those attainments as equivalent to unbinding, one is suffering from wrong view. To hold to that wrong view puts the total release to be found with unbinding beyond reach. This unwillingness to endorse other paths, however, does not necessarily lead to intolerance. Buddhism's basic premise is the principle of karma, that happiness and suffering are the results of one's own past and present actions. The Noble Eightfold Path grows out of this principle as the most skillful mode of action for escaping from the cycle of karmic retribution and attaining the deathless. Other paths are either incomplete expressions of the Noble Eightfold Path or are based on other principles. For example, they may state that there is a being who can sidestep the law of karma and provide for one's happiness without one's having to master the skills of the Noble Eightfold Path, or that certain ritual actions or words can provide a similar shortcut to happiness. People who follow either of these two latter beliefs could well feel threatened by outsiders who do not share their beliefs, for the outsiders are in effect denying the existence of a shortcut on which the insiders are placing their hopes. This explains why such people have often been intolerant of outside views. But because the principle of karma is a teaching of full personal responsibility, no one who believes in karma will feel threatened by people who teach shortcuts around karma. Buddhists who have yet to attain stream entry may waver in their conviction, as the path can seem long and arduous, and the results slow in coming, and this is one reason why they are encouraged not to associate with anyone who rejects the principle of karma. But those who have had their first taste of awakening can in no way be persuaded to doubt the principle, for they have seen that the deathless can be touched only through a process that requires the utmost skill in mindfulness and discernment applied to the processes of one's own mind. Their attitude toward other teachings is that of a skilled artisan toward those with lesser skills, or of a woman who has learned how to extract sesame oil from sesame seeds toward those who are still trying to extract it from gravel. She will want to teach them the right way if they are willing to listen, but if they are unwilling, she will tolerate their ignorance and hope that someday they will be ready to learn. To attain this level of unshakable conviction requires that one put the Dhamma into practice. This shows the intimate relationship between the intellectual and practical aspects of conviction. One must have a certain level of intellectual understanding of the doctrinal Dhamma before one can practice it, and one must practice it to the point of touching the Dhamma of deathlessness as an attainment before one's conviction in the teaching of the Dhamma can become unshakably firm. The commentaries bring out this relationship by applying the term Dhamma to all three of these levels: doctrine, practice, and attainment, or in other words, Dhamma as an object of awareness, on the intellectual level, as a means of releasing awareness from bondage to its objects, on the practical level, and as the awareness released at the point of awakening. The practical aspect of conviction, prior to stream entry, is covered by the factor of stream entry called practicing in accordance with the Dhamma. What this factor means is that one must be willing to put the Dhamma ahead of one's preferences, so that one is not practicing simply in line with one's likes and dislikes. This is the true test of one's conviction. It is all too easy to pick and choose from the teachings on the basis of other standards. Here in the West, it is common to judge the Dhamma against Western psychology or other social sciences, and to pick and choose accordingly. But one must ask oneself the same question that Prince Siddhartha posed for himself: which is a more worthwhile use of one's time, the pursuit of objects and ideals subject to change and death, or the pursuit of the deathless? Although there is a long-standing recognition in the Buddhist tradition that people benefit even if they follow only part of the teaching, the Dhamma can give its full results only if one commits oneself fully to developing the skill of release in one's thoughts, words, and deeds. This training is similar to following a doctor's regimen. One will benefit even from following the regimen only occasionally, but a full cure requires sticking to the regimen consistently and putting the goal of recovery ahead of one's other preferences. The skill of release requires ordering one's priorities, taking the teachings and example of those who have attained that skill as one's primary guide, and regarding everything else as secondary. With the attainment of stream entry, one's conviction in the principle of karma and its skillful mastery becomes so firm that one would not intentionally break any of the basic precepts that comprise right speech, right action, or right livelihood. This is the import of the factor of stream entry called virtues appealing to the noble ones. In addition to virtue, stream winners have also begun to develop the other two aggregates in the noble path, concentration and discernment, but those two aggregates are not yet fully matured. Conviction cannot become firm until the remaining four faculties, including concentration and discernment, have been strengthened to at least some extent. Once conviction does becomes firm, it can then function to strengthen those faculties even further. The stream winner realizes, from the experience of stream entry, not only that he or she attained that experience through mastery of the processes of karma, but also that his or her awakening is not yet complete because there are gaps in that mastery. This realization is what gives impetus for the further development of all five faculties until they issue in the full realization of the deathless. As he was seated to one side, Then Ananda said to the Blessed One, "This is half of the holy life, Lord. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie." Don't say that, Ananda. Don't say that. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is actually the whole of the holy life. When a monk has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades, he can be expected to develop and pursue the noble eightfold path. And how does a monk who has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades develop and pursue the noble eightfold path? There is the case where a monk develops right view dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, dependent on cessation, resulting in letting go. He develops right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. This is how a monk who has admirable people as friends, companions, and comrades develops and pursues the noble eightfold path. And through this line of reasoning one may know how admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is actually the whole of the holy life. Its independence on me as an admirable friend, that being subject to birth have gained release from birth, that being subject to aging have gained release from aging, that being subject to death have gained release from death, that being subject to sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair have gained release from sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Manama, to the Buddha, there may be the case where a Dhamma disagreement arises, with the Blessed One on one side and the community of monks on the other. I would be on the same side as the Blessed One. May the Blessed One remember this as my confidence in him. There may be the case where a Dhamma disagreement arises, with the Blessed One on one side and the community of monks and the community of nuns on the other. I would be on the same side as the Blessed One. May the Blessed One remember this as my confidence in him. There may be the case where a Dhamma disagreement arises, with the Blessed One on one side and the community of monks and the community of nuns and the male lay followers and the female lay followers, and the world with its devas, maras, brahmas, its generations with their contemplatives and brahmins, their royalty and common folk on the other. I would be on the same side as the Blessed One. May the Blessed One remember this as my confidence in him. The Buddha, turning to Manama's companion, Goda. Now, Goda, what do you have to say about Manama when he speaks in such a way? Goda. I have nothing to say about Manama when he speaks in such a way, except that he is admirable and skillful. Advice to a lay person. Now what, Tiger Paw, Bhagapajya, is meant by admirable friendship? There is the case where a lay person, in whatever town or village he may dwell, spends time with householders or householders' sons, young or old, who are advanced in virtue. He talks with them, engages them in discussions. He emulates consummate conviction in those who are consummate in conviction, consummate virtue in those who are consummate in virtue, consummate generosity in those who are consummate in generosity, and consummate discernment in those who are consummate in discernment. This is called admirable friendship. A friend endowed with these three qualities is worth associating with. Which three? He gives what is hard to give, does what is hard to do, endures what is hard to endure. A friend endowed with these three qualities is worth associating with. These three things have been promulgated by wise people, by people of integrity. Which three? Generosity, going forth from the home life, and service to one's mother and father. These three things have been promulgated by wise people, by people of integrity. And what, monks, is the treasure of generosity? There is the case of a disciple of the noble ones, his awareness cleansed of the stain of stinginess, living at home, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in being magnanimous, responsive to requests, delighting in the distribution of alms. This is called the treasure of generosity. If beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of miserliness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared, if there were someone to receive their gift. But because beings do not know, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they eat without having given. The stain of miserliness overcomes their minds. Monks, Brahmins, and householders are very helpful to you, as they provide you with the requisites of robes, alms food, lodgings, and medical requisites for the sick. And you, monks, are very helpful to Brahmins and householders, as you teach them the Dhamma admirable in the beginning, admirable in the middle, and admirable in the end, as you expound the holy life both in letter and meaning, entirely complete, surpassingly pure. In this way the holy life is lived in mutual dependence, for the purpose of crossing over the flood, for making a right end to stress. Householders and the homeless, in mutual dependence, both reach the true Dhamma, the unsurpassed safety from bondage. From householders, the homeless, receive requisites, robes, lodgings, protection from inclemencies, while in dependence on those well gone, home-loving householders have conviction in arahants, of noble discernment, absorbed in jhana, having practiced the Dhamma here, the path leading to good destinations, delighting in the heavenly world, they rejoice, enjoying sensual pleasures. Now, what is the level of a person of no integrity? A person of no integrity is ungrateful and unthankful. This ingratitude, this lack of thankfulness is advocated by rude people. It is entirely on the level of people of no integrity. A person of integrity is grateful and thankful. This gratitude, this thankfulness, is advocated by civil people. It is entirely on the level of people of integrity. I tell you, monks, there are two people who are not easy to repay. Which two? Your mother and father. Even if you were to carry your mother on one shoulder and your father on the other shoulder for 100 years, and were to look after them by anointing, massaging, bathing, and rubbing their limbs, and they were to defecate and urinate right there on your shoulders, you would not in that way pay or repay your parents. If you were to establish your mother and father in absolute sovereignty over this great earth, abounding in the 7 treasures, you would not in that way pay or repay your parents. Why is that? Mother and father do much for their children. They care for them, they nourish them, they introduce them to this world. But anyone who rouses his unbelieving mother and father, settles and establishes them in conviction, rouses his unvirtuous mother and father, settles and establishes them in virtue, rouses his stingy mother and father, settles and establishes them in generosity, rouses his foolish mother and father, settles and establishes them in discernment. To this extent one pays and repays one's mother and father. Living with Brahma are those families where, in the home, mother and father are revered by the children. Living with the first devas are those families where, in the home, mother and father are revered by the children. Living with the first teachers are those families where, in the home, mother and father are revered by the children. Living with those worthy of gifts are those families where, in the home, mother and father are revered by the children. Brahma is a designation for mother and father, the first devas, the first teachers. Those worthy of gifts is a designation for mother and father. Why is that? Mother and father do much for their children. They care for them, they nourish them, they introduce them to this world. Mother and father, compassionate to their family, are called Brahma, first teachers, those worthy of gifts from their children, so the sage should pay them homage, honor, with food and drink, clothing and bedding, anointing and bathing, and washing their feet. Performing these services to their parents, the wise are praised right here, and after death, rejoice in heaven. A beginning point for ignorance, such that one might say, before this, ignorance did not exist, then it came into play, cannot be discerned. This has been said. Nevertheless, it can be discerned. Ignorance comes from this condition, and I tell you, ignorance has its nutriment, it is not without nutriment. And what is the nutriment for ignorance? The 5 hindrances. And what is the nutriment for the 5 hindrances? The 3 forms of misconduct. And what is the nutriment for the 3 forms of misconduct? Lack of restraint of the senses. And what is the nutriment for lack of restraint of the senses? Lack of mindfulness and alertness. And what is the nutriment for lack of mindfulness and alertness? Inappropriate attention. And what is the nutriment for inappropriate attention? Lack of conviction. And what is the nutriment for lack of conviction? Not hearing the true Dhamma. And what is the nutriment for not hearing the true Dhamma? Associating with people of no integrity, or not associating with people of integrity. Just as when the Devas pour rain in heavy drops and crash thunder on the upper mountains, the water, flowing down along the slopes, fills the mountain clefts and rifts and gullies. When the mountain clefts and rifts and gullies are full, they fill the little ponds. When the little ponds are full, they fill the big lakes, the little rivers, the big rivers. When the big rivers are full, they fill the great ocean, and thus is the great ocean fed, thus is it filled. In the same way, when not associating with people of integrity is brought to fulfillment, it fulfills the conditions for not hearing the true Dhamma, lack of conviction, inappropriate attention, lack of mindfulness and alertness, lack of restraint of the senses, the 3 forms of misconduct, the 5 hindrances. When the 5 hindrances are brought to fulfillment, they fulfill the conditions for ignorance. Thus is ignorance fed, thus is it brought to fulfillment. Now, I tell you, clear knowing and release have their nutriment. They are not without nutriment. And what is their nutriment? The 7 factors for awakening. And what is the nutriment for the 7 factors for awakening? The 4 frames of reference. And what is the nutriment for the 4 frames of reference? The 3 forms of right conduct. And what is the nutriment for the 3 forms of right conduct? Restraint of the senses. And what is the nutriment for restraint of the senses? Mindfulness and alertness. And what is the nutriment for mindfulness and alertness? Appropriate attention. And what is the nutriment for appropriate attention? Conviction. And what is the nutriment for conviction? Hearing the true Dhamma. And what is the nutriment for hearing the true Dhamma? Associating with people of integrity. Just as when the Devas pour rain in heavy drops and crash thunder on the upper mountains, the water, flowing down along the slopes, fills the mountain clefts and rifts and gullies, the little ponds, the big lakes, the little rivers, the big rivers. When the big rivers are full, they fill the great ocean, and thus is the great ocean fed, thus is it filled. In the same way, when associating with people of integrity is brought to fulfillment, it fulfills the conditions for hearing the true Dhamma, conviction, appropriate attention, mindfulness and alertness, restraint of the senses, the 3 forms of right conduct, the 4 frames of reference, the 7 factors for awakening. When the 7 factors for awakening are brought to fulfillment, they fulfill the conditions for clear knowing and release. Thus is clear knowing and release fed, thus is it brought to fulfillment. These are 8 causes, 8 conditions for the attainment of discernment basic to the holy life when it has not yet been attained, and for its growth, its increase, and for the culmination of its development when it has. Which 8? There is the case where a monk dwells in dependence on the teacher, or another fellow in the holy life worthy of being a teacher, under whom he becomes firmly established in a strong sense of shame and compunction, love and respect. This is the first cause, the first condition. And what is the treasure of shame? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones feels shame at the thought of engaging in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. This is called the treasure of shame. And what is the treasure of compunction? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones feels compunction at the thought of bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct. This is called the treasure of compunction. As he so lives, he periodically approaches his teacher to ask and inquire of him, "How, venerable sir, does this happen? What is the meaning of this?" To him, the teacher reveals what is hidden, clarifies what is obscure, and dispels any doubt he may have about the various things that give him reason to doubt. This is the second cause, the second condition. When he has heard the Dhamma, he accomplishes 2-fold seclusion, seclusion of body and seclusion of mind. This is the third cause, the third condition. He is virtuous and loves restrained by the Patimokkha, consummate in his behavior and range of activity. Seeing danger in the slightest fault, he undertakes and trains himself in the training rules. This is the fourth cause, the fourth condition. He is erudite, a keeper and storehouse of learning. He is erudite in the teachings, admirable in their beginning, admirable in their middle, admirable in their end, that affirm the holy life in letter and meaning, entirely complete, surpassingly pure. He has resolved on them, has made them familiar to his speech, has pondered them over in his mind, and has penetrated them, attuned himself to them, in terms of his views. This is the fifth cause, the fifth condition. He keeps his persistence aroused for abandoning unskillful mental qualities and taking on skillful mental qualities. He is steadfast, solid in his effort, not shirking his duties with regard to skillful mental qualities. This is the sixth cause, the sixth condition. When he joins the community, he is not talkative, nor does he discuss low topics. He either speaks Dhamma himself or asks someone else to, and he does not despise noble silence, the second jhana. This is the seventh cause, the seventh condition. Finally, he remains focused on the arising and passing away of the five clinging aggregates, such as form, such its origination, such its disappearance, such as feeling, such as perception, such are fabrications, such as consciousness, such its origination, such its disappearance. This is the eighth cause, the eighth condition for the attainment of discernment basic to the holy life when it has not yet been attained, and for its growth, its increase, and for the culmination of its development when it has. Regard him as one who points out treasure, the wise man who, seeing your faults, rebukes you. Stay with this sort of sage, for the one who stays with a sage of this sort, things get better, not worse. These are the five rewards of conviction in a lay person. Which five? When people of integrity in the world show compassion, they will first show compassion to people of conviction and not to people without conviction. When visiting, they first visit people of conviction and not people without conviction. When accepting gifts, they will first accept those from people with conviction and not from people without conviction. When teaching the Dhamma, they will first teach those with conviction and not those without conviction. A person of conviction on the breakup of the body after death will arise in a good destination, a heavenly world. These are the five rewards of conviction in a lay person. Just as a large banyan tree on level ground where four roads meet is a haven for the birds all around, even so a lay person of conviction is a haven for many people, monks, nuns, male lay followers and female lay followers. A massive tree whose branches carry fruits and leaves, with trunks and roots and an abundance of fruits. There the birds find rest. In that delightful sphere they make their home. Those seeking shade come to the shade. Those seeking fruit find fruit to eat. So with the person consummate. In virtue and conviction, humble, sensitive, gentle, delightful, and mild. To him come those without effluent, free from passion, free from aversion, free from delusion, the field of merit for the world. They teach him the Dhamma, that dispels all stress, and when he understands, he is freed from effluence, totally unbound. A female disciple of the noble ones who grows in terms of these five types of growth, grows in the noble growth, grasps hold of what is essential, what is excellent in the body. Which five? She grows in terms of conviction, in terms of virtue, in terms of learning, in terms of generosity, in terms of discernment. Growing in terms of these five types of growth, the female disciple of the noble ones grows in the noble growth, grasps hold of what is essential, what is excellent in the body, growing in conviction and virtue, discernment, generosity, and learning. A virtuous female lay disciple, such as this, takes hold of the essence within herself. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, what accords with the Dhamma is this: the Blessed One is the teacher, I am a disciple, he is the one who knows, not I. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, the teacher's message is healing and nourishing. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, what accords with the Dhamma is this: gladly would I let the flesh and blood in my body dry up, leaving just the skin, tendons, and bones. But if I have not attained what can be reached through manly firmness, manly persistence, manly striving, there will be no relaxing my persistence. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, one of two fruits can be expected, either gnosis here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging/sustenance, non-return, deep concentration, abandoning the hindrances. Several discourses in the canon state that the first step in concentration practice is to abandon the 5 hindrances, which we have already discussed in conjunction with the 7 factors for awakening. They are sensual desire, ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety, and uncertainty. These hindrances need to be abandoned because they function as intermediate levels of the 3 roots of unskillfulness. Sensual desire is a form of greed, ill will a form of aversion, and the remaining 3 hindrances forms of delusion. All 5, in their various ways, block concentration and weaken discernment by making it difficult to realize what is beneficial for oneself, for others, or for both. This last point makes them particularly tricky to deal with, for one needs to have a sense that they are unbeneficial states of mind before one can work at abandoning them, yet while one is overcome with them, they impair one's ability to see that they are in fact unbeneficial. For instance, when one feels sensual desire for another person, it is hard to focus on the unattractive side of that person or on the drawbacks of the desire itself. Similarly, when one feels anger, it is hard not to feel that the anger is justified. When sleepy, it is hard not to feel that one should get some sleep. When worried, it is hard not to believe that one needs to worry, and so forth. Although the hindrances cannot be totally relinquished prior to the various stages of awakening, they can be lessened on a preliminary level to the point where the mind can settle down in jhana. This preliminary level is the focus of the passages in this section. Passage 159 lists 5 methods for dealing with unskillful thoughts in the course of meditation. The passages included here focus almost exclusively on using the first 2 of those methods, replacing the unskillful thoughts with skillful ones, and contemplating the drawbacks of the unskillful thoughts until one feels repulsed by them, so as to escape from the power of any hindrances that have overcome the mind. Examples of the first method include focusing on the unattractive side of any sensual object to which one may be attracted, focusing on the good qualities of a person who has aroused thoughts of ill will, focusing on the foolishness of expecting all people to act in line with one's wants, and changing one's object of concentration when finding that the current object is inducing sleepiness. Examples of the second method include realizing that the hindrance is placing the mind in a state of bondage and limitation, and that one can find freedom only by releasing oneself from its power. In practice, these are not the only ways of applying these 2 general approaches. The examples in the text can act as inspiration for any similar techniques that a meditator might devise to obtain the desired effect. To escape the double bind mentioned above, the fact that the hindrances blind one to one's own true best interests, and yet one needs to see those true interests if one is to overcome the hindrances, one must depend on all 5 faculties as one has been able to develop them. Conviction is needed so that one will listen to the advice of those who point out the drawbacks of the hindrances. A certain momentum of persistence, as right exertion, is needed so that one will make the effort to abandon the hindrance as soon as one is aware that it has arisen and before it grows into anything stronger. Mindfulness, based on the frames of reference, is needed so that one can be alert to the arising of the hindrances and can remember why they should be abandoned in the first place. This mindfulness can be strengthened by remembering the teachings of others who have pointed out the drawbacks of the hindrances. The many similes for the hindrances serve the purpose of keeping those memories vivid. It can also be strengthened by remembering the drawbacks of the hindrances as encountered in one's own personal experience, the damage that has come when another person has given in to them, and the things that one regrets having done oneself when under their influence. Because preliminary levels of concentration and discernment are present in right exertion and the practice of the frames of reference, these faculties play a role in abandoning the hindrances as well. As they develop strength, they make one more and more skilled in cutting off the hindrances as effectively as possible. The 7 factors for awakening, which are developed in concentration, act as direct antidotes to the hindrances, while discernment, combined with concentrated mindfulness, helps in mastering what is probably the most effective tool for not being fooled by the hindrances, the ability to separate the hindrance as an act of the mind from its object. For instance, discernment makes one able to see the feeling of sensual desire as one thing and the object of the desire as something separate, This ability is crucial in a number of ways. To begin with, it helps separate the positive qualities of the object from the act of desiring the object so that one does not confuse the two. The tendency to confuse the two is what makes it hard to see the drawbacks of the desire when it is present in the mind, and at the same time serves to harden the mind in general against the Buddha's admonishments against sensuality. There is a widespread feeling that Buddhism gives an unfair valuation of sensuality and is blind to the positive beauties of sensual objects, but this is simply not true. The Buddha admitted that sensual objects have their beauty and can give a measure of satisfaction. He pointed out, however, that the beauty of an object is not the whole story, for all beautiful objects must decay. If one's happiness is based on them, that happiness is in for a fall. More importantly, though, the Buddha defined sensuality not as the objects of the senses, but as the passion and delight that one feels for one's intentions toward such objects. Although the objects of the senses are neither good nor evil per se, the act of passion and delight forms a bond on the mind, disturbing its immediate peace and ensuring its continued entrapment in the round of rebirth and redeath. Only by separating the desire from its object can one directly perceive the truth of these teachings. This point applies to the other hindrances as well. For instance, when one can separate the object of one's anger from the anger itself as a mental event, one can see the obvious drawbacks of allowing anger to take over the mind. In addition, the ability to separate the act from its object enables one to become sensitive to the act before it becomes overpowering, at the same time allowing one to regard it simply as a mental quality in and of itself. One can then engage in the practice of observing the coming and going of the hindrances as one tries to bring the mind to concentration. In this way, one eventually becomes so familiar with the patterns underlying their occurrence that one can undercut them and eliminate them from the mind for good. One of the patterns that one will see when sensual desire arises, sexual attraction for another person, begins with a sense of attraction for one's own sexuality. Passage 96, in a more abstract fashion, lists other patterns of mind that feed the hindrances. By perceiving such patterns, one can take one's analysis of the roots of unskillfulness in the mind to ever more subtle levels. In this way, the skill of being able to abandon the hindrances will go beyond simply the preliminary level of concentration practice, exercising all 5 of the faculties to the point where they issue an awakening. These are the 5 hindrances and obstructions that overcome awareness and weaken discernment. Which 5? Sensual desire is a hindrance and obstruction that overcomes awareness and weakens discernment. Ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety. Uncertainty is a hindrance and obstruction that overcomes awareness and weakens discernment. Suppose there were a river flowing down from the mountains, going far, its current swift, carrying everything with it. If a man were to open watercourses leading off from both sides, the current in the middle of the river would be interrupted, diverted, and dispersed. The river would not go far, its current would not be swift, and it would not carry everything with it. In the same way, if a monk has not rid himself of these 5 hindrances, there is no possibility that he can know what is for his own benefit, or the benefit of others, or both, or that he should come to realize a superior human attainment, a truly noble knowledge and vision. But suppose there were a river flowing down from the mountains, going far, its current swift, carrying everything with it. If a man were to close off the watercourses leading off from both sides, the current in the middle of the river would not be interrupted, diverted, or dispersed. The river would go far, its current swift, carrying everything with it. In the same way, if a monk has rid himself of these 5 hindrances, there is the possibility that he can know what is for his own benefit, or the benefit of others, or both, and that he should come to realize a superior human attainment, a truly noble knowledge and vision. There are these 5 impurities, defiled with which gold isn't pliant, malleable, or luminous. It is brittle and not rightly fit for work. Which 5? Iron, copper, tin, lead, and silver. But when gold is freed from these 5 impurities, it is pliant, malleable, and luminous. It is not brittle and is rightly fit for work. Then whatever sort of ornament one has in mind, whether a belt, an earring, a necklace, or a gold chain, it would serve one's purpose. In the same way, there are these 5 defilements of the mind, defiled with which the mind isn't pliant, malleable, or luminous. It is brittle and not rightly concentrated for the ending of the effluence. Which 5? Sensual desire, ill will, sloth and drowsiness, restlessness and anxiety, and uncertainty. But when the mind is freed from these 5 defilements, it is pliant, malleable, and luminous. It is not brittle and is rightly concentrated for the ending of the effluence. Then whichever of the qualities to be known and realized, section 60, that one turns one's mind to know and realize, one can witness them right there whenever there is an opening. Similes for the hindrances. Imagine a bowl of water mixed with lac, yellow orpiment, indigo, or crimson, such that a man with good eyesight examining the reflection of his face in it would not be able to know or see his face as it has come to be. In the same way, when one remains with awareness possessed by sensual passion, overcome with sensual passion, and neither knows nor sees the escape, as it has come to be, from sensual passion once it has arisen, then one neither knows nor sees what is for one's own benefit, or for the benefit of others, or for the benefit of both. Now imagine a bowl of water heated on a fire, boiling and bubbling over, such that a man with good eyesight examining the reflection of his face in it would not be able to know or see his face as it has come to be. In the same way, when one remains with awareness possessed by ill will, overcome with ill will, and neither knows nor sees the escape, as it has come to be, from ill will once it has arisen, then one neither knows nor sees what is for one's own benefit, or for the benefit of others, or for the benefit of both. Now imagine a bowl of water covered with algae and slime, such that a man with good eyesight examining the reflection of his face in it would not be able to know or see his face as it has come to be. In the same way, when one remains with awareness possessed by sloth and drowsiness, overcome with sloth and drowsiness, and neither knows nor sees the escape as it has come to be, from sloth and drowsiness once it has arisen, then one neither knows nor sees what is for one's own benefit, or for the benefit of others, or for the benefit of both. Now imagine a bowl of water ruffled by the wind, disturbed, and covered with waves, such that a man with good eyesight examining the reflection of his face in it would not be able to know or see his face as it has come to be. In the same way, when one remains with awareness possessed by restlessness and anxiety, overcome with restlessness and anxiety, and neither knows nor sees the escape as it has come to be, from restlessness and anxiety once it has arisen, then one neither knows nor sees what is for one's own benefit, or for the benefit of others, or for the benefit of both. Now imagine a bowl of water stirred up, turbid, muddied, and left in the dark, such that a man with good eyesight examining the reflection of his face in it would not be able to know or see his face as it has come to be. In the same way, when one remains with awareness possessed by uncertainty, overcome with uncertainty, and neither knows nor sees the escape as it has come to be, from uncertainty once it has arisen, then one neither knows nor sees what is for one's own benefit, or for the benefit of others, or for the benefit of both. Suppose that a man, taking a loan, invested in his business affairs. His business affairs succeed. He repays his old debts and has extra left over for maintaining his wife. The thought would occur to him, before, taking a loan, I invested it in my business affairs. Now my business affairs have succeeded. I have repaid my old debts and have extra left over for maintaining my wife. Because of that, he would gain joy and experience happiness. Now suppose that a man falls sick, in pain and seriously ill. He does not enjoy his meals and has no measure of strength in his body. At a later time he is released from that sickness. He enjoys his meals and has a measure of strength in his body. The thought would occur to him, before, I was sick. Now I am released from that sickness. I enjoy my meals and have a measure of strength in my body. Because of that he would gain joy and experience happiness. Now suppose that a man is bound in prison. At a later time he is released from that bondage, safe and sound, with no loss of property. The thought would occur to him, before, I was bound in prison. Now I am released from that bondage, safe and sound, with no loss of my property. Because of that he would gain joy and experience happiness. Now suppose that a man is a slave, subject to others, not subject to himself, unable to go where he likes. At a later time he is released from that slavery, subject to himself, not subject to others, freed, able to go where he likes. The thought would occur to him, before, I was a slave. Now I am released from that slavery, subject to myself, not subject to others, freed, able to go where I like. Because of that he would gain joy and experience happiness. Now suppose that a man, carrying money and goods, is traveling by a road through desolate country. At a later time he emerges from that desolate country, safe and sound, with no loss of property. The thought would occur to him, before, carrying money and goods, I was traveling by a road through desolate country. Now I have emerged from that desolate country, safe and sound, with no loss of my property. Because of that he would gain joy and experience happiness. In the same way, when these 5 hindrances are not abandoned within him, the monk regards it as a debt, a sickness, a prison, slavery, a road through desolate country. But when these 5 hindrances are abandoned within him, he regards it as unindebtedness, good health, release from prison, freedom, a place of security. Sensual desire. I have heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying near Savathai in Jedda's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now on that occasion the Blessed One was sitting out in the open in the pitch black of the night, while oil lamps were burning. Many flying insects were meeting their downfall and misfortune in those oil lamps. Seeing this, the Blessed One exclaimed, rushing headlong, missing what's essential, bringing on one new bond after another, like insects falling into the flame. Some are intent only on what's seen and heard, clinging to sensuality, to sensual ties, seeing no blame in the fetter. Never will those tied up in the fetter cross over the flood so great and wide. I will teach you a Dhamma discourse on bondage and lack of bondage. A woman attends inwardly to her feminine faculties, her feminine gestures, her feminine manners, feminine poise, feminine desires, feminine voice, feminine charms. She is excited by that, delighted by that. Being excited and delighted by that, she attends outwardly to masculine faculties, masculine gestures, masculine manners, masculine poise, masculine desires, masculine voices, masculine charms. She is excited by that, delighted by that. Wants to be bonded to what is outside her, wants whatever pleasure and happiness that arise based on that bond. Delighting, caught up in her femininity, a woman goes into bondage with reference to men. This is how a woman does not transcend her femininity. A man attends inwardly to his masculine faculties, masculine gestures, masculine manners, masculine poise, masculine desires, masculine voice, masculine charms. He is excited by that, delighted by that. Being excited and delighted by that, he attends outwardly to feminine faculties, feminine gestures, feminine manners, feminine poise, feminine desires, feminine voices, feminine charms. He is excited by that, delighted by that. Wants to be bonded to what is outside him, wants whatever pleasure and happiness that arise based on that bond. Delighting, caught up in his masculinity, a man goes into bondage with reference to women. This is how a man does not transcend his masculinity. And how is there lack of bondage? A woman does not attend inwardly to her feminine faculties, feminine charms. She is not excited by that, not delighted by that, does not attend outwardly to masculine faculties, masculine charms. She is not excited by that, not delighted by that, does not want to be bonded to what is outside her, does not want whatever pleasure and happiness that arise based on that bond. Not delighting, not caught up in her femininity, a woman does not go into bondage with reference to men. This is how a woman transcends her femininity. A man does not attend inwardly to his masculine faculties, masculine charms. He is not excited by that, not delighted by that, does not attend outwardly to feminine faculties, feminine charms. He is not excited by that, not delighted by that, does not want to be bonded to what is outside him, does not want whatever pleasure and happiness that arise based on that bond. Not delighting, not caught up in his masculinity, a man does not go into bondage with reference to women. This is how a man transcends his masculinity. This is how there is lack of bondage. And this is the Dhamma discourse on bondage and lack of bondage. Suppose a dog, overcome with weakness and hunger, were to come across a slaughterhouse, and there a skilled butcher or butcher's apprentice were to fling him a chain of bones, thoroughly scraped, without any flesh, smeared with blood. What do you think? Would the dog, gnawing on that chain of bones, thoroughly scraped, without any flesh, smeared with blood, appease his weakness and hunger? No, Lord. And why is that? Because the chain of bones is thoroughly scraped, without any flesh, and smeared with blood. The dog would get nothing but weariness and vexation. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to a chain of bones, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. Seeing this with right discernment as it has come to be, then avoiding the equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity, he develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose a vulture, a kite, or a hawk were to take off, having seized a lump of flesh, and other vultures, kites, or hawks, following right after it, were to tear at it and pull at it. What do you think? If that vulture, kite, or hawk were not quickly to drop that lump of flesh, would it meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain? Yes, Lord. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to a lump of flesh, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. He develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose a man were to come against the wind, carrying a burning grass torch. What do you think? If he were not quickly to drop that grass torch, would he burn his hand or his arm or some other part of his body, so that he would meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain? Yes, Lord. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to a grass torch, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. He develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose there were a pit of glowing embers, deeper than a man's height, full of embers that were neither flaming nor smoking, and a man were to come along, loving life, hating death, loving pleasure, abhorring pain, and two strong men, having grabbed him with their arms, were to drag him to the pit of embers. What do you think? Wouldn't the man twist his body this way and that? Yes, Lord. And why is that? Because he would realize, if I fall into this pit of glowing embers, I will meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to a pit of glowing embers, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. He develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose a man, when dreaming, were to see delightful parks, delightful forests, delightful stretches of land, and delightful lakes, and on awakening were to see nothing. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this point. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to a dream, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. He develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose a man having borrowed some goods, a manly carriage, fine jewels, and ear ornaments, were to go into the market preceded and surrounded by his borrowed goods, and people seeing him would say, "How wealthy is this man, for this is how the wealthy enjoy their possessions," but the actual owners, wherever they might see him, would strip him then and there of what is theirs. What do you think? Would the man justifiably be upset? No, Lord. And why is that? Because the owners are stripping him of what is theirs. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the Noble Ones considers this point. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to borrowed goods, of much stress, much despair, the drawback there is greater. He develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. Now suppose that, not far from a village or town, there were a dense forest grove, and there in the grove was a tree with delicious fruit, abundant fruit, but with no fruit fallen to the ground. A man would come along, desiring fruit, looking for fruit, searching for fruit. Plunging into the forest grove, he would see the tree. And the thought would occur to him, this is a tree with delicious fruit, abundant fruit, and there is no fruit fallen to the ground, but I know how to climb a tree. Why don't I climb the tree, eat what I like, and fill my clothes with the fruit? So, having climbed the tree, he would eat what he liked and fill his clothes with the fruit. Then a second man would come along, desiring fruit. Searching for fruit and carrying a sharp axe, plunging into the forest grove, he would see the tree. And the thought would occur to him, I don't know how to climb a tree. Why don't I chop down this tree at the root, eat what I like, and fill my clothes with the fruit? So he would chop the tree at the root. What do you think? If the first man who climbed the tree didn't quickly come down, wouldn't the falling tree crush his hand or foot or some other part of his body, so that he would meet with death from that cause, or with death-like pain? Yes, Lord. In the same way, householder, a disciple of the noble ones considers this point. The Blessed One has compared sensuality to the fruits of a tree, of much stress, much despair. The drawback there is greater. Seeing this with right discernment as it has come to be, then avoiding the equanimity coming from multiplicity, dependent on multiplicity, he develops the equanimity coming from singleness, dependent on singleness, where clingings for worldly baits totally cease without trace. The Buddha, Maganjya, suppose that there was a leper covered with sores and infections, devoured by worms, picking the scabs off the openings of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a pit of glowing embers. Then suppose his friends, companions, and relatives brought a doctor to treat him. The doctor would concoct medicine, and by means of that medicine he would be cured of his leprosy, well and happy, free, master of himself, going wherever he liked. Then suppose two strong men, having grabbed him with their arms, were to drag him to a pit of glowing embers. What do you think? Wouldn't he twist his body this way and that? Maganjya. Yes, Master Gotama. Why is that? The fire is painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. The Buddha. Now what do you think? Is the fire painful to the touch, very hot and scorching, only now, or was it also that way before? Maganjya. Both now and before is it painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. It's just that when the man was a leper, his faculties were impaired, which was why, even though the fire was actually painful to the touch, he had the skewed perception of pleasant. The Buddha. In the same way, sensuality in the past was painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. Sensuality in the future will be painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. Sensuality at present is painful to the touch, very hot and scorching. But when beings are not free from passion for sensuality, devoured by sensual craving, burning with sensual fever, their faculties are impaired, which is why, even though sensuality is actually painful to the touch, they have the skewed perception of pleasant. Now suppose that there was a leper covered with sores and infections, devoured by worms, picking the scabs off the openings of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a pit of glowing embers. The more he cauterized his body over the pit of glowing embers, the more disgusting, foul-smelling, and putrid the openings of his wounds would become, and yet he would feel a modicum of enjoyment and satisfaction because of the itchiness of his wounds. In the same way, beings not free from passion for sensuality, devoured by sensual craving, burning with sensual fever, indulge in sensuality. The more they indulge in sensuality, the more their sensual craving increases and the more they burn with sensual fever, and yet they feel a modicum of enjoyment and satisfaction dependent on the 5 strings of sensuality. Now what do you think? Have you ever seen or heard of a king or king's minister enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 strings of sensuality, without abandoning sensual craving, without removing sensual fever, who has dwelt or will dwell or is dwelling free from thirst, his mind inwardly at peace? Maganjya. No, Master Gotama. The Buddha. Very good, Maganjya. Neither have I. But whatever contemplatives or Brahmins who have dwelt or will dwell or are dwelling free from thirst, their minds inwardly at peace, all have done so having realized, as it has come to be, the origination and disappearance, the allure, the danger, and the escape from sensuality, having abandoned sensual craving and removed sensual fever. Look at the beautified image, a heap of festering wounds, shored up, ill, but the object of many resolves, where there is nothing lasting or sure, a city made of bones, plastered over with flesh and blood, whose hidden treasures are pride and deceit, aging and death. Not even if it rained gold coins, would we have our fill of sensual pleasures, stressful, they give little enjoyment. Knowing this, the wise one finds no delight, even in heavenly sensual pleasures. He is one who delights in the ending of craving, a disciple of the rightly self-awakened one. As Suba the nun was going through Javaka's delightful mango grove, a libertine, a goldsmith's son, blocked her path, so she said to him, "What wrong have I done you, that you stand in my way? It's not proper, my friend, that a man should touch a woman gone forth. I respect the teacher's message, the training pointed out by the one well gone. I am pure, without blemish. Why do you stand in my way? You, your mind agitated. I, unagitated. You, impassioned. I, unimpassioned, unblemished, with a mind everywhere released. Why do you stand in my way? You are young and not bad-looking. What need do you have for going forth? Throw off your ochre robe. Come, let's delight in the flowering forest, a sweetness they exude from all around. The towering trees with their pollen. The beginning of spring is a pleasant season. Come, let's delight in the flowering forest. The trees with their blossoming tips moan, as it were, in the breeze. What delight will you have if you plunge into the forest alone, frequented by herds of wild beasts, disturbed by elephants rutting and aroused? You want to go, unaccompanied, into the great, lonely, frightening forest. Like a doll made of gold, you will go about, like a goddess in the gardens of heaven. With delicate, smooth, casey fabrics, you will shine, O beauty without compare. I would be under your power, if we were to dwell in the wood. For there is no creature dearer to me than you, O nymph with the languid regard. If you do as I ask, happy, come live in my house, dwelling in the calm of a palace. Have women wait on you. Wear delicate casey fabrics. Adorn yourself with garlands and creams. I will make you many and varied ornaments of gold, jewels, and pearls. Climb onto a costly bed, scented with sandalwood carvings, with a well-washed coverlet, beautiful, spread with a woolen quilt, brand new, like a blue lotus rising from the water, where there dwell non-human spirits. You will go to old age with your limbs unseen. If you stay as you are in the holy life, what do you assume of any essence, here in this cemetery grower, filled with corpses, this body destined to break up? What do you see when you look at me, you who are out of your mind? Your eyes are like those of a fawn, like those of a nymph in the mountains. Seeing your eyes, my sensual delight grows all the more. Like tips they are of blue lotuses in your golden face, spotless. Seeing your eyes, my sensual delight grows all the more. Even if you should go far away, I will think only of your pure, long-lashed gaze, for there is nothing dearer to me than your eyes, O nymph with a languid regard. You want to stray from the road. You want the moon as a plaything. You want to jump over Mount Senaru. You who have designs on one born of the Buddha, for there is nothing anywhere at all, in the world with its devas, that would be an object of passion for me. I don't even know what that passion would be. For it's been killed, root and all, by the path, like embers from a pit, scattered, like a bowl of poison, evaporated. I don't even see what that passion would be. For it's been killed, root and all, by the path. Try to seduce one who hasn't reflected on this, or who the teacher hasn't instructed, but try it with this one who knows, and you do yourself violence, for whether insulted or worshipped, in pleasure or pain, my mindfulness stands firm, knowing the unattractiveness of fabricated things. My heart adheres nowhere at all. I am a follower of the one well gone, riding the vehicle of the eightfold way. My arrow removed, effluent free, I delight, having gone to an empty dwelling, for I have seen well-painted puppets, hitched up with sticks and strings, made to dance in various ways. When the sticks and strings are removed, thrown away, scattered, shredded, smashed into pieces, not to be found, in what will the mind there make its home? This body of mine, which is just like that. When, devoid of Dhammas, doesn't function. When, devoid of Dhammas, it doesn't function. In what will the mind there make its home? Like a mural you've seen, painted on a wall, smeared with yellow ornament. There your vision has been distorted, meaningless your perception of a human being. Like an evaporated mirage, like a tree of gold in a dream, like a magic show in the midst of a crowd, you run blind after what is unreal, resembling a ball of sealing wax, set in a hollow, with a bubble in the middle, and bathed with tears. Eye secretions are born there too. The parts of the eye are rolled all together in various ways. Plucking out her lovely eye, with mind unattached, she felt no regret. Here, take this eye, it's yours. Straightway she gave it to him. Straightway his passion faded right there, and he begged her forgiveness. Be safe, follower of the holy life. This sort of thing won't happen again. Harming a person like you is like embracing a blazing fire. It's as if I have seized a poisonous snake. So may you be safe. Forgive me. And freed from there, the nun went to the excellent Buddha's presence. When she saw the mark of his excellent merit, her eye became, as it was before, ill will. These are 5 ways of subduing hatred, by which, when hatred arises in a monk, he should wipe it out completely. Which 5? When one gives birth to hatred for an individual, one should develop good will for that individual. Thus the hatred for that individual should be subdued. When one gives birth to hatred for an individual, one should develop compassion for that individual, equanimity toward that individual. One should pay him no mind and pay him no attention. When one gives birth to hatred for an individual, one should direct one's thoughts to the fact of his being the product of Kama. This venerable one is the doer of Kama, heir of Kama, born of Kama, related by Kama, and has Kama as his arbitrator. Whatever Kama he does, for good or for evil, to that will he fall heir. Thus the hatred for that individual should be subdued. These are 5 ways of subduing hatred, by which, when hatred arises in a monk, he should wipe it out completely. Then, Sariputta, there are some people who are impure in their bodily behavior but pure in their verbal behavior. Hatred for a person of this sort should be subdued. There are some people who are impure in their verbal behavior but pure in their bodily behavior. Hatred for a person of this sort should also be subdued. There are some people who are impure in their bodily behavior and verbal behavior, but who periodically experience mental clarity and calm. Hatred for a person of this sort should also be subdued. There are some people who are impure in their bodily behavior and verbal behavior, and who do not periodically experience mental clarity and calm. Hatred for a person of this sort should also be subdued. There are some people who are pure in their bodily behavior and their verbal behavior, and who periodically experience mental clarity and calm. Hatred for a person of this sort should also be subdued. Now, as for a person who is impure in his bodily behavior but pure in his verbal behavior, how should one subdue hatred for him? Just as when a monk who makes use of things that are thrown away sees a rag in the road, taking hold of it with his left foot and spreading it out with his right, he would tear off the sound part and go off with it. In the same way, when the individual is impure in his bodily behavior, but pure in his verbal behavior, one should at that time pay no attention to the impurity of his bodily behavior and instead pay attention to the purity of his verbal behavior. Thus the hatred for him should be subdued. And as for a person who is impure in his verbal behavior, but pure in his bodily behavior, how should one subdue hatred for him? Just as when there is a pool overgrown with slime and water plants, and a person comes along burning with heat, covered with sweat, exhausted, trembling, and thirsty. He would jump into the pool, part the slime and water plants with both hands, and then, cupping his hands, drink the water and go on his way. In the same way, when the individual is impure in his verbal behavior, but pure in his bodily behavior, one should at that time pay no attention to the impurity of his verbal behavior, and instead pay attention to the purity of his bodily behavior. Thus the hatred for him should be subdued. And as for a person who is impure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, but who periodically experiences mental clarity and calm, how should one subdue hatred for him? Just as when there is a little puddle in a cow's footprint, and a person comes along, burning with heat, covered with sweat, exhausted, trembling, and thirsty. The thought would occur to him, here is this little puddle in a cow's footprint. If I tried to drink the water using my hand or cup, I would disturb it, stir it up, and make it unfit to drink. What if I were to get down on all fours and slurp it up like a cow, and then go on my way? So he would get down on all fours, slurp up the water like a cow, and then go on his way. In the same way, when an individual is impure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, but periodically experiences mental clarity and calm, one should at that time pay no attention to the impurity of his bodily behavior, the impurity of his verbal behavior, and instead pay attention to the fact that he periodically experiences mental clarity and calm. Thus the hatred for him should be subdued. And as for a person who is impure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, and who does not periodically experience mental clarity and calm, how should one subdue hatred for him? Just as when there is a sick man, in pain, seriously ill, traveling along a road, far from the next village and far from the last, unable to get the food he needs, unable to get the medicine he needs, unable to get a suitable assistant, unable to get anyone to take him to human habitation. Now suppose another person were to see him coming along the road. He would do what he could out of compassion, pity, and sympathy for the man, thinking, oh, that this man should get the food he needs, the medicine he needs, a suitable assistant, someone to take him to human habitation. Why is that? So that he won't fall into ruin right here. In the same way, when a person is impure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, and who does not periodically experience mental clarity and calm, one should do what one can out of compassion, pity, and sympathy for him, thinking, oh, that this man should abandon wrong bodily conduct and develop right bodily conduct, abandon wrong verbal conduct and develop right verbal conduct, abandon wrong mental conduct and develop right mental conduct. Why is that? So that, on the breakup of the body, after death, he won't fall into a plane of deprivation, a bad destination, a lower realm, hell. Thus the hatred for him should be subdued. And as for a person who is pure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, and who periodically experiences mental clarity and calm, how should one subdue hatred for him? Just as when there is a pool of clear water, sweet, cool, and limpid, with gently sloping banks and shaded on all sides by trees of many kinds, and a person comes along, burning with heat, covered with sweat, exhausted, trembling, and thirsty. Having plunged into the pool, having bathed and drunk and come back out, he would sit down or lie down right there in the shade of the trees. In the same way, when an individual is pure in his bodily behavior and verbal behavior, and periodically experiences mental clarity and calm, one should at that time pay attention to the purity of his bodily behavior, the purity of his verbal behavior, and to the fact that he periodically experiences mental clarity and calm. Thus the hatred for him should be subdued. An entirely inspiring individual can make the mind grow serene. These are 5 ways of subduing hatred, by which, when hatred arises in a monk, he should wipe it out completely. There are these 10 ways of subduing hatred. Which 10? 1. Thinking, he has done me harm, but what should I expect? One subdues hatred. 2. Thinking, he is doing me harm, but what should I expect? 3. He is going to do me harm, but what should I expect? 4. He has done harm to people who are dear and pleasing to me, but what should I expect? He is doing harm to people who are dear and pleasing to me, but what should I expect? 6. He is going to do harm to people who are dear and pleasing to me, but what should I expect? 7. He has aided people who are not dear or pleasing to me, but what should I expect? 8. He is aiding people who are not dear or pleasing to me, but what should I expect? 9. He is going to aid people who are not dear or pleasing to me, but what should I expect? One subdues hatred. One doesn't get worked up over impossibilities. These are 10 ways of subduing hatred. He insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me. For those who brood on this, hostility isn't stilled. He insulted me, hit me, beat me, robbed me. For those who don't brood on this, hostility is stilled. Hostilities aren't stilled through hostility, regardless. Hostilities are stilled through non-hostility. This an unending truth. Sloth and drowsiness. Once the Blessed One was living among the Bhagas in the deer park at Besakala Grove, near Crocodile Haunt. At that time, then, Maha Moggallana, prior to his awakening, sat nodding near the village of Kalavalaputta in Magadha. The Blessed One saw this with his purified divine eye, surpassing the human, and as soon as he saw this, just as a strong man might extend his flexed arm or flex his extended arm, disappeared from the deer park, appeared right in front of Ven Maha Moggallana, and sat down on a prepared seat. As he was sitting there, the Blessed One said to Ven Maha Moggallana, "Are you nodding, Moggallana? Are you nodding?" "Yes, Lord." "Well then, Moggallana, whatever perception you have in mind when drowsiness descends on you, don't attend to that perception, don't pursue it. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then recall to your awareness the Dhamma as you have heard and memorized it, re-examine it and ponder it over in your mind. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then repeat aloud in detail the Dhamma as you have heard and memorized it. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then pull both your earlobes and rub your limbs with your hands. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then get up from your seat and, after washing your eyes out with water, look around in all directions and upward to the major stars and constellations. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then attend to the perception of light, resolve on the perception of daytime, dwelling by night as by day, and by day as by night. By means of an awareness thus open and unhampered, develop a brightened mind. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then, percipient of what lies in front and behind, set a distance to meditate, walking back and forth, your senses inwardly immersed, your mind not straying outward. It's possible that by doing this you will shake off your drowsiness. But if by doing this you don't shake off your drowsiness, then, reclining on your right side, take up the lion's posture, one foot placed on top of the other, mindful, alert, with your mind set on getting up. As soon as you wake up, get up quickly with the thought, I won't stay indulging in the pleasure of lying down, the pleasure of reclining, the pleasure of drowsiness. Thus, Moggallana, should you train yourself.